Hi, everybody. I'm Jill, and I have one bike. I have a beach bike that I use on the Breakwater Junction Trail, and it's kind of rusty, and I don't take very good care of it. And then I always think of it as a new bike, but I think it's about 15 years old now. And I love it, and it's just a regular pedal bike, and I like to pedal on the C&D Canal, and I need to take it out a little bit more. I used to have a dog that I had to run, and that's why I biked. So let me just again welcome everybody. And as you know, Green Drinks, we are a casual environmental group, and we have been virtual since the pandemic started. Dee and I first met with this group at Galuccio's, where they would fix us up some really nice green drinks. So now you get to bring your own. I also would like to remind you, and again, in no particular order, that all of our past recordings can be found at Plastic Free Delaware YouTube. Several people have asked about the recordings, and they are all at Plastic Free Delaware YouTube. Just type that in and they pop right up. So I'd like to thank the folks who are co-sponsors, co-hosts, and folks who advertise or publicize this, don't advertise. We are a private nonprofit educational group. We have no actual legal standing, but the Sierra Club is a co-host, Citizens Climate Lobby is a co-host, obviously Plastic Free Delaware with Dee. The Delaware Native Plants Society helped put out the word, and Interfaith Power and Light. So please be aware of all these good people who work with us on the environment. So drum roll, drum roll. James, we are absolutely delighted to have you. Let me introduce you by way of reading a little biography here. James Wilson is a member of the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, by whom he was named the 2014 Professional of the Year in the nonprofit sector, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and the governor appointed Delaware Bicycle Council, and is also the only registered lobbyist for cycling and walking in Delaware, both of which we need a lot more of, not necessarily lobbyists, but cycling and walking. James helped create and continue to lead Bike Delaware's participation in the Walkable, Bikeable Delaware campaign, and successfully lobbied for, according to Delaware bike laws, the best bike laws in the country. During his tenure at Bike Delaware's executive director, during his tenure as Bike Delaware's executive director, Delaware advanced in the national bicycle-friendly state rankings from 5 years in a row, further and faster than any other state ever. He holds an engineering degree from Yale University and the University of Texas in Austin. So, James, we look forward to hearing all your good information. And when you're done, we will open the floor to questions.
Is it all right if I encourage people to ask me to pause at slides?
Yes, certainly.
So I'm gonna lean towards going a little quickly. So along with that, I'm gonna invite anyone who there's something interesting or I just progress the slide a little bit too quickly, please tell me to pause or to go back. I'd be happy to do that. So Bike Delaware is, a nonprofit here in Delaware, 501c3, nonpartisan, like the League of Women Voters and the AARP. Our mission is to make cycling and walking safe, convenient, and fun transportation options. And I'm going to be talking about how when we're thinking about climate action, climate change, we should be thinking about more than just electric cars. Well, that's interesting. There we go. So many of you may know this, the transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is why people are, I think, so interested in electric cars. It's an opportunity to work on that problem. The electric cars, of course, are only as good as the electricity, the power system behind it. When you charge up your car, if you've got a lot of renewables, then your electric cars are going to be have low emissions themselves. On the other hand, if you've got a really dirty power system, then your electric cars are not going to really, lower emissions. China is sort of the current example of that. Introducing electric cars in China would actually be a net negative at the moment, given their how heavily their electrical power comes from coal. In the US, our biggest source of electrical power is natural gas, and that's a lot better than coal. And so as a result, for a given vehicle, electrifying that vehicle basically cuts your CO2 emissions in half, a little bit more than half. That doesn't help though. That will not get you where you want to go if your if the size of your vehicle fleet increases. I thought this was really interesting. The battery of an electric Hummer is itself, just the battery alone weighs more than a Honda Civic. An electric Hummer is going to have less emissions than a non-electric Hummer, but if you're just upsizing your vehicle fleet, you're gonna give away the advantages that you gained with electrification. And that's the trend, unfortunately. This is we're about half of new car sales in the US are SUVs right now in the United States, and that continued growth will, if we see continued SUV growth, we will continue to see that we're not getting the benefits from electrification that we had hoped. But bottom line, if we take the size of the vehicle fleet as given, vehicle electrification does reduce CO2. And to the extent that our electric power system continues to be decarbonized, those emissions will continue to fall. But electric cars are still cars. So I want to talk a little bit about some aspects of that. So here are annual fatalities of climate-related phenomenon, so heat, flooding, that kind of thing. Right now in the US, we have about 300 climate-related phenomena that are associated with climate. We have about 300 fatalities. And of course, as climate change gets worse, that can get worse. But right now, that's where we are at 300. And it's worth comparing that to the annual number of people who are killed every year in the United States in traffic crashes, which is in 2020, which is the last official year that we have numbers, was over 38,000. So 38,000 is more than 2 orders of magnitude higher than the fatalities that we're seeing from climate-related phenomenon. In addition, it's not something that, it's very, I think if you're a middle-class person or, professional, you take vehicle ownership for granted. It's just not that big of a financial issue, but as you go down in the income scale, it can be brutal financially for poor and working class people. Just to illustrate that, I think this is a great little thing from AAA. 64 million American drivers can't afford a major car repair without going into debt. So they are that on the edge financially, and those are people who would benefit enormously financially if they did not have to own a car, own, insure, maintain, and fuel a car. The median cost of owning, insuring, maintaining, and fueling a car in the United States is over $10,000. Again, if you're middle class or more, that's just a cost. It's not that big of a deal, but for a lot of folks, it really is. And then the last thing I want to mention is, the role of car dependency in a lot of our public health issues. We have a lot of extremely high levels of obesity and the chronic diseases, heart disease, stroke, several types of cancer, diabetes. All these things are related to obesity, and the U.S. has those problems far more severely than basically any of our advanced sort of peers who are at the same level of GDP. And it's associated with this overwhelming car dependency in the United States. So how do we reduce car dependency in order to reduce vehicle miles traveled and therefore carbon dioxide emissions? So the whole remaining slides I'm going to be talking about really about two things: supply and demand. You can really think about this issue. I think it's very helpful to think about addressing this issue from either a supply or demand point of view. So this picture there is the largest bicycle bridge in the state of Delaware. It's part of the Markel Trail connecting Wilmington and Newcastle. Was and continues to be the most expensive bicycle project in Delaware history. Not even the whole thing, just the last difficult part, which was this bridge over the Christina River, an elevated boardwalk, and another big structure. And it's just one example from what's been going on in Delaware the last 10 years, which was the biggest and busiest decade by far of trail building. There's no comparison to any other decade in Delaware history. We built the Markel Trail to connect Wilmington and Newcastle. We built the Castle Trail that connects Delaware City all the way past, and it goes over the Maryland border to Chesapeake City. And it's not done yet, but the Lewis to Georgetown Trail is about halfway done. That'll be the longest trail in Delaware, 22 miles. So I'd like a little audience participation here. Just anybody, if your microphone is muted, just unmute. I would really appreciate anybody just taking a guess. Not Peggy, anybody but Peggy. Who built these trails?
State of Delaware.
Taxpayers.
Yeah, can you be more specific? Like what entity?
DelDOT?
Yes, that's right. DelDOT built the Markel Trail.
No, we built these trails.
Who said that?
Fred Hardman, we built these trails and we need to keep building these trails.
Yes.
So I'm
We
gonna,
need to
Fred,
be
I'm
passionate about it.
we can come back again to that, but I'm gonna stick with my initial answer. We can argue about it towards the end. So
Yeah, right, but their history.
So
We
DelDOT
these
built the
trails.
Markel Trail, DelDOT built the Castle Trail, and DelDOT built the Lewis to Georgetown Trail. And the reality is that if DelDOT had not gotten into the trails business, which happened in 2011, those trails would not be built because they're just too big. There's no other governmental entity in Delaware, literally no other governmental entity in Delaware that has the funding and capacity to build projects of this magnitude.
James,
Yes?
if it was DelDOT, do they have a separate division for this type of work?
They do, and they did not have it. So this all got started in 2011 with legislation from the General Assembly saying, DelDOT, get in the trails business. That was passed in 2011. Then Governor Markel came along the next year. This is him speaking at his State of the State speech of 2012, say it was the most forgettable. It was very like education, it was just a lot of sort of unspecific things. There was only one number in the entire hour-plus long speech. Only one number in the entire speech. He said, I want to spend $13 million to make Delaware one of the most walkable and bikeable states in the country. $13 million. Every lobbyist, I was around back then, every lobbyist in Dover came up to me and said, you're not going to get that money. No. There's no way you're going to get that money. We did get that money. DelDOT, this work at DelDOT has subsequently become really institutionalized there. And before this happened, there was no group at DelDOT to do this. But with the money, it's now a permanent line item in DelDOT's budget. They have now reorganized their internal structure so that there is a section of DelDOT that works on these things, that did the Markel Trail, the Castle Trail, is finishing the Lewis to Georgetown Trail. So that's a little bit inside baseball, but if we want these kinds of this is the kind of governmental capacity that had to be built, funding and capacity.
Does DelDOT, are they responsible for the follow-up and upkeep, or just the building?
It totally depends. They like to enter into maintenance agreements with other government entities if they can, but it varies. So for the Markel Trail, they struck a deal with Newcastle County. So Newcastle County manages that. For the Castle Trail, that's managed by DENREC. And for the Lewis to Georgetown Trail, they couldn't find anybody who was willing to take it on. So they managed the Lewis to Georgetown Trail themselves. So I really want to say, I mean, I'd love to talk for a whole half an hour about this, this slide and 10 others, because this is an extremely important topic. So when we're talking about supply, infrastructure that makes it possible for people to choose to bike instead of drive, we're not just talking about trails, because that's not enough. What we need is a complete, what we call low stress network, a network that is safe and comfortable for people basically of any age and any ability. And these trails are key sort of key elements of this network, but you have to build a lot more. And a great example of this is Delaware Avenue in Newark. I would say Newark and Lewis are sort of the two communities in the state that have the most sort of advanced infrastructure. Delaware Avenue, for anybody who lives or works in Newark, as you know, it's being totally torn up. A lot of that is due to the fact that they're building a bikeway there. And this is not just your dad's bike lane, right? This is a highly engineered piece of transportation infrastructure that at every single signalized intersection, for example, will have Delaware's very first bicycle traffic signal phases. So no longer are you just gonna like move through these intersections and be like, good luck to me, that I don't get knocked over by turning vehicles. Instead, you will have your own bicycle phase to help you move through the intersection. First bicycle traffic signals like that anywhere in Delaware. And then you see these signs. This was the front page of the New York Post a few months back. There are these what we call low traffic stress wayfinding signs that sign this low stress network that Newark is doing a great job building, and that we want to build in every other community in the state.
James, with the Newark project, are they going back and retrofitting this, or is this still new construction?
So they've torn Delaware Avenue to pieces. It's part of what they call pave and rehab, but they're really doing quite a bit of work here to make this bikeway as a part of it.
So is that something that, say, Newcastle County or the other areas could see DelDOT implementing, or was that initiated from the city of Newark?
So this is a DelDOT project, but it was absolutely requested by the city of Newark, but it's being paid for, and the project is being done. Delaware Avenue is owned by DelDOT. And so it's a DelDOT project on a DelDOT road requested by the city of Newark, being paid for by DelDOT. I don't think there's any money coming from Newark for this project. So the other part of reduce, so we talked about, I know I could talk a lot more about the supply angle, but I don't want to just talk about supply. I at least want to touch on the other side of this idea of how you reduce demand for vehicle travel and instead move it over to bike travel. And that's the demand side. So I've only got a few slides here, and sort of like this question of the low traffic stress networks and how you build those out and how you analyze those and everything that's changed inside of DelDOT. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to talk about there. this too is a fairly complicated question, and I'm just going to touch lightly on it with a few slides. But what I want to say is, this is what we've been building in Delaware, not just us. You know, this is America. In fact, I'm not even sure these are Delaware slides, but it could be, that could be a Delaware subdivision, that could be a Delaware shopping mall, that could be DuPont Highway or Pulaski Highway or Kirkwood Highway. You know, this is what we have been building in the last 50 years. Single-use subdivisions over there, 10 miles away, shopping malls over there, and these what we call stroads that connect all this stuff together. And all this stuff generates vehicle trips, because you'd have to be a moron or absolutely desperate to try to get places between your subdivision, these shopping malls, and these stroads on a bike. I mean, A, it's taking your life in your hands, and B, everything's really far apart. So, you see really poor and desperate people sometimes, but that's about all that you see. You don't see, certainly no people who have options, who can like either afford a car or just barely buy a car without really being able to afford it. That's what you do. You get a car, because anything else doesn't make sense given the physical structure of the communities that we've been building for the last 50 years. So if we want to talk about the demand side of reducing vehicle travel, then we have to address this issue, right? Which seems, right? Does anybody on this call think this is like not an extremely difficult and complicated problem, right? I mean, like, it just seems overwhelming, the idea that, I mean, this is our life. This is how we've been doing things for 50 years. How can we turn that around? Well, I got a couple of slides to sort of give you a taste of that. So the basic idea is that instead of having your shopping malls 10 miles away from your subdivisions 10 miles over there, and your office parks 10 miles over there, with everything connected by DuPont Highway or Congress, instead you want to build, what we used to build 100 years ago, communities where you have a fine-grained mix of uses, so that you don't, things are close enough so that a car is not necessary. You have things are relatively short together. And a bike, in fact, would get you to everything really efficiently. To build those kinds of to build that kind of stuff going forward, as opposed to the single-use subdivisions, shopping malls, and office parks, that is pretty much all we've been doing for the last few years, would require a whole, suite of policy changes that are all sort of linked together. You have to change the zoning. You have to get rid of minimum parking regulations. You have to get DelDOT required to invest not in new road capacity, but instead in walking, cycling, and transit. You have to slow vehicle traffic. If you've got any fast vehicles moving through this community, people are not going to get out there in anything except a car out of sheer self-defense. And you've got to make it clear to everybody that instead of our transportation system being based on just new road capacity, which is what we've been doing for the last 50 years, you've got to say no. In fact, the exact opposite. We're not going to build new road capacity, unless it's like a little street. But basically, you're not going to build anything more than 2 lanes. So that's like a whole bunch of complicated policies at once. So, well, can you do that? Well, if you can, I think this slide is a little bit out of place. I think I meant to put this slide one before. I just wanted to point out that if you can, it's really good from a climate point of view. So the red areas are the high CO2 emissions areas, and the green are the low. And you see all of the DC, the inner city DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. Those are all much lower CO2 places, per household CO2 emissions than the surrounding suburbs. Hold on, I seem to be missing I thought I had another slide here. So I'm going to have to I'm gonna have to do a little hand waving here because this is at the end of the thing. So these are the suite of policies that you need. You need them all in order to change the way development happens going forward in a given area. And Delaware actually did pass a piece of legislation in 2016 called the Healthy and Transit Friendly Development Act, which creates a mechanism in state law for the state, DelDOT, and local jurisdictions who are in charge of land use to agree and designate an area where they want this kind of development going forward. And it requires that all of these policies be put in place simultaneously so that when developers and private sector and anybody else coming in, they all know what's going on. And it also then changes the essentially changes the operating system for DelDOT, right? For the last 50 years, DelDOT has been very focused on building new capacity for cars to accommodate either existing or projected development. And this changes the operating system for DelDOT, at least for one of these areas where the state and the local government agree, we want a different style of development. So that, again, that was a lot of hand waving there. And if people have questions, I can go into more details, but I didn't want to put in a whole bunch of slides here. I thought that was getting into too much detail. So again, that's a picture of stuff that Bike Delaware works on. Our focus is on reducing car dependency, and our approach to that is this. We want to push on the supply side, and we want to push on the demand side. Thank you.